You've likely heard the name Alexander, the Iron Fist, a story that has transcended through the ages, but of course we will get there. Hello, traveller. It's good to see you again on this winding road we share. I hope the evening finds you well, calm in spirit, proud of the day behind you. Pull your cloak a little tighter, and I'll tend the fire. Let the warmth rise, let the stars settle in above us. Though I'm long since past, this story is written by one of your own, in your time a traveller who enjoys tales and asked me to tell them to you. For tonight, I've a special story to tell, one whispered only in certain circles, told in low tones by flickering flame. A tale not of this world, but of a place between worlds, a realm some call the lands between, a place of faded grace, fallen gods, and unyielding will. Now then, we return to the story you've come to hear. Alexander, the Iron Fist, a warrior Jar who stood against the mighty General Radahn and lived to tell of it, who climbed the mountaintops and dared face the giants in their frozen halls. But those are the tales that echo in the songs of bards and the mouths of kings. What few know is how Alexander became the Iron Fist. And to understand that, we must travel back, not a year or a decade, but a century or more. Back to when he was not yet a warrior, but simply one Jar among many. You see, in the lands where Alexander was born, no one truly knows where the Jars come from. Some whisper of grim rites, ancient rituals led by feuding priestesses and blood-bound mages, locked in a war no one remembers. Others claim the Jars are burial vessels for history's greatest warriors, urns not just of bone and ash, but of memory and will. The truth, even the Jars themselves don't know. A cruel trick by those who created them, in order to preserve their mystery or, perhaps, hide their intentions. For Jars do not grow like men or beasts. They do not age or learn the way we do. They simply arrive, whole, waiting, carrying the remnants of those who came before. But if you had asked young Alexander, before the name, before the strength, he would have told you he was made for greatness, that the warriors within him were not mournful ashes, but sparks, sparks that longed for the clang of steel and the roar of war. For, like all true warriors, Alexander was born hungry, hungry for battle, hungry for glory, hungry to prove that even something shaped of clay could shake the world. And though he had yet to actually see any battle, he was certain it was made just for him. And this is where we find our young hero. For his journey, or at least the journey as we've come to know it, begins on the night of his name day. And so it was that Alexander lived in a small town in the world between worlds. Its true name is known only to the Jars, but over time those who've heard whispers of it have come to call it simply Jarburg. Ah, Jarburg. Tucked beneath the cliffs like a secret the land forgot, there lies a village not marked on any map, nor will you find it by road or by sign, but by silence and chance. For Jarburg remains even to this day, hopeful to never be found. It's a place where the sky is always a little softer and the grass grows taller, unbothered by boots or blades. Clay homes sit nestled like sleeping beasts, and tiny Jars, no taller than a man's knee, tend their gardens with wooden spades and song. There is no war in Jarburg, no banners, no steel, only the creak of old ropes, the hum of bees, and the warmth of sun on fired clay. They say the jars there are born with gentler souls, shaped not for battle, but for blooming things, for planting lilies, brewing herbs, and dreaming without fear. Of course, what their true purpose is, no one will ever know. You see, life is tough for a jar. Jars, though fragile, of course, are prized, not for what they are, but for what's inside them. Some believe that carrying the shards of a jar grants the bearer the strength or wisdom of the lives sealed within, and for that reason jars are hunted, poached, broken, and scattered across the world. That is why Jarburg remained hidden. That is why the jars lived in seclusion. On this day long ago, the day of Alexander's name day, it was a beautiful day like any other. There was music, pleasant aromas. Jars, of course, never eat, but they do love the smell of well-cooked food. That and warm breezes, something the lands between, bathed in golden light for generations, had become known for. But this day, unlike the rest, did not end gently. No one is certain how it began. The shift came subtly at first, around 15 hours past sunrise, as the jars of Jarburg hummed their midday songs and the air thickened with the scent of fire-warmed clay. The sky began to darken, not with cloud or storm, but with wings. They came not one, but many, a host of dragons, rippling and vast. Their scales were as jagged as obsidian cliffs, their eyes aglow with the memory of an age when they were kings. Their thunderous wings eclipsed the sun. The wind of their arrival uprooted fences, shattered clay pots, and scattered garden herbs to the breeze. And at the front of this swarm rode Ulric the DragonRider. He did not shout commands. He did not raise his blade. He simply watched from the back of his mount, a drake with bone-colored scales and a tail like a whip of stone. Ulric wore no helmet, only a scorched gold circlet and armor blackened by the breath of the beasts he mastered. His hair was red, bound tight, and his eyes were not his own, twin embers lit by an unknown communion. They say he was once a man of low station who stole the hearts of dragons and offered his soul in return for fire, though no one knows for certain. But on that day, Jarburg learned the name Ulric with a fear that would never leave them. The dragons descended like a storm of hammers. Homes cracked and shattered. Small jars were flung aside like pebbles. Some broke instantly, their innards scattered across the garden beds. Others fled, clutching roots or diving beneath the old ropes. But it was no use. The dragons were not there to conquer. They had come to take, and anything in their way was destroyed. What were they looking for, you ask? It is said that at the center of the village, deep beneath a moss-stained stone, lay the shards of Varn the Hollow-Bound. His body had long since crumbled, but his shard, a single piece of ancient red clay, had been preserved and anointed for generations. The jars believed it sacred, a secret even, but they were wrong, for the shard of Varn was no ordinary relic. It was believed to carry the final echoes of Cyril the Young, a mage who lived for 10,000 years and then, by his own will, surrendered immortality and entered the after-death. His soul, they say, passed into the clay of Varn, sealed within him as a final rite, the only remaining piece now in a single hidden shard. And it was that immortality, fractured and buried, that Ulric sought. With a guttural cry, one of the lesser dragons tore through the earth and buildings of Jarburg. Finally, coming to an ancient church, the dragon began to destroy and dig. What had been hidden for centuries was unearthed in seconds. And before the jars could cry out, the shards of Varn was lifted into clawed hands and carried high into the burning sky. The dragons did not linger. In moments, Jarburg was ruined, gardens trampled, homes shattered, the air thick with dust and silence. Only one sound remained, the trembling breath of Alexander hidden beneath an overturned cart, his hunger for battle stifled now by reality. And it was there, in the shadow of ruin, that something stirred in him. Certain now of his safety, Alexander climbed out from beneath the cart. The air was thick with smoke, and the cries of his brethren rang out like broken bells. He had survived with only a small crack across the top of his rim. It will spread, he thought as he felt it. But no matter, it was only a scar, perhaps. But nothing fatal, not yet. Then he saw it. A hand, smooth clay, chipped at the knuckles, reaching toward the sky. It was Falca, his brother. For all jars are truly brothers, even if not by blood, then by shard and soul. "Alexander," Falca called out, though his voice barely reached a whisper. A wet rattle clung to the syllables. Alexander rushed to him, stumbling over shattered clay and upturned soil. "No, Falca, no!" he cried, lifting his brother into his arms. Falca's body was cracked down the center, his innards glowing faintly with the last warmth of life, leaked in thin ribbons of dust. "They took it," Falca muttered, barely holding his shape. "Took what?" Alexander asked, clutching him tighter. "What did they take?" Falca tried to speak, but his voice was failing. Instead, he raised a trembling arm and pointed toward the old church as the crumbled ruin at the heart of Jarburg. It was then that Alexander understood. "They took him," he whispered. "They found Sir Varn." "We'll put you back, brother," Alexander said, the words coming quickly, foolishly, as if they might stop what was already happening. "We'll find him, bring him home, you and me, brother, just like we always talked about, adventure." But he had let the moment sit too long. Falca's arm fell, his glow dimmed, and he was gone, finally resting in golden light. "Brother!" Alexander cried, but there was no one to hear him. Little is known of what happened next. Jarburg lay in ruins. A few jars remained, though even fewer ever spoke of what happened that day. And as for Ulric, how he discovered the secret of the jars, the hidden resting place of Varn the Hollowbound, that remains a mystery to most. But Alexander knew. Yes, it is a sad truth that all heroes are born in pain, and Alexander's pain ran deeper than most. For Alexander, ever hungry for stories and the wide world beyond, had ventured far beyond Jarburg in his youth. He wandered among humans, traded tales in taverns, sat in circles of mages and merchants alike. He had loved the myths of Caria, marveled at the idea of cities made of silver and smoke, and once spent an entire week debating whether the stars could in fact be held in place with gravity, only to discover later that they could. And, as curious travelers often do, he told stories, Eventually, and in an effort to impress his newfound friends, his stories began to tell of Varn the Hollowbound, of the sacred shards kept deep beneath Jarburg, of Cyril the Young who had defied death and left behind a sliver of his soul sealed in red clay. He hadn't thought it dangerous at the time. No one believed the jars capable of guarding such things. Many thought him mad. Others laughed. Alexander laughed with them, a jar accepted by those around him, and when the dragons came, he tried truly to convince himself it was coincidence, that someone else had spoken, that maybe Ulric's communion had shown him a vision, or perhaps some traitor from a forgotten age had broken the seal. But deep down, Alexander knew. The tale had started with him, and, like all stories worth telling, it had found its way to someone willing to kill for it. As all honesty does, as all truth does, it began to rot Alexander from the inside out. Living amongst the shards of his family, his companions, Alexander was only reminded of the destruction he brought to others. And it was at some time unknown in the weeks following the attack that Alexander decided he would avenge his fallen brothers and return the sacred shard, if not back to Jarburg, at least back to the jars. It was then, as myth says, that Alexander gathered the remnants of his fallen brothers, Folker, Scepter, Barton, and many others, and removing his own lid, placed his brothers inside of himself. Adventure, brothers, he declared to no one in particular. Adventure awaits us. It was symbolic, if anything, for no one really knows the magic of what's inside of a jar. But it was the moment that emboldened a young Alexander, a moment that would lead to him becoming the Iron Fist. Now, you may be wondering about Ulric, the DragonRider of red hair, or so he would like you to believe. You see, in the lands between, red hair carried much weight, for it was the hair of the royal family, the children of which had heads that blazed like the flames dancing before you now. And it is said that it was common for those seeking to give the impression of royalty or importance to dye the hair red. Though, I am told, no one, no matter how expensive the dye or extensive the effort, no one could quite match the luster of the true royal family of the lands between. So it was that Ulric, born of hair black as night, came to have his own head of red hair. Though it should be known that Ulric was no mere peasant or socialite of the land between, but a great warrior known to fight for legends like Godwin the Golden, and it was here too that Ulric bonded with the dragons, though the lesser kind to be certain, and for his service was given a small castle nestled on the black cliffs of the highest mountains overlooking the forgotten areas of the lands between. It was here Ulric, forgotten hero of Godwin, fell in love and grew his family. But it wasn't just anyone Ulric fell in love with. You may be familiar with the name of Carilla of the Dew. No, you say? Interesting how myths fall apart. Carilla of the Dew, though her name impressive, carried little weight in the lands between. Her family, though of some nobility, was most notable for its sickliness rather than any particular triumph or major accomplishment. From what this sickliness came, we know not. But, as anyone can tell you, magic is a dangerous art, capable, in the wrong or incompetent hands, of cursing not only oneself, but one's entire bloodline. And I suspect Carilla's ancestors, one or another, dabbled in the arts they should have stayed far away from. Nevertheless, Carilla, though beautiful, was no stranger of this sickliness. But as we know, we rarely have control over our own hearts, and it was one fateful night that Carilla and Ulric met, and soon after fell in love, and eventually into marriage. For Ulric was certain that with his connections to Godwin and the royal family that he could conquer his wife's destiny, and for years he was proven correct. The royal family, though famous for its problems, had no lack of resources when it came to physics or mages or, in the case of the lands between, perfumers. But even the greatest of mages, no matter the realm, are left helpless in the face of the gods, in the face of destiny. It was thus that 5 years after the marriage of Carilla and Ulric, giving Ulric only one heir, Carilla passed in the arms of her beloved, who held her, wet with tears, leaving Ulric only to rage against the gods and seclude himself in his small kingdom in the castle. For the next 10 years, Ulric raised his son alone, catching glimpses of his bride in a look or occasional smile so much like his mother's. For it was Ulric's plan to hand his own kingdom to his son, for him to grow it and become not just another lord, but a king in the lands between. But as fate would have it, the day came when Ulric heard through the echoing halls of his castle a cough, agony deep in the chest of his son that lingered and brought Ulric back to the memory of his bride. And it was then he decided that he would do whatever it took to save his son, the only remaining shard of his beloved. Ulric's search continued for years, his son growing sicker every day as Ulric, exhausting all efforts of even the royal family, tried everything in his power to keep his boy, so much in pain, so sickly, alive. Ulric had just about given up hope, when one night his servant, fresh from the tavern, whispered to him a secret he had heard, though by this time it had travelled through a dozen voices at least, of a sacred shard of an ancient jar that granted immortality. So it was that Ulric, angry with the gods, determined to save his only blood, committed himself to the destruction of the jars, resting all of his hopes on a forgotten secret whose power was never fully certain. And it is here, traveller, I will leave you to rest. There is much of our story to continue. Alexander's determination to return his sacred shard is training across the lands between, and some other adventures I will not ruin for you. Our story to continue tomorrow. Sleep well, traveller. We know not what the gods bring us in the days to come.